Hi, welcome back to another episode on the Healthy Wisdom series with Dr. Jen Chen. In continuation with our brief discussion on breathing from our last episode, I was thinking it'd be good to actually explore a little bit further on some of the characteristics on breathing so that we may further our understanding, because this is a very complex system that will help us understand everything and tie it all together. So from the available research by Boyton in 1998 and Masaoka and Oma in 2011, we do learn that negative emotions result in shallower and more rapid breathing patterns. And by negative emotions, we're talking about fear, anger, and anxiety, for example, here. Now let's take a minute to experience these emotions so that we can really connect with our bodies and have a better understanding as to what we are trying to convey here. Now choose one of the three emotions that we've listed. And to be honest, no matter which of the ones that you do choose, you're going to feel very similar physiological changes. So I'm going to ask you to use your imagination a little bit here. Close your eyes and just envision an experience where you were very scared. It can be maybe that sensation after watching a really creepy movie and having to go to the bathroom afterwards by yourself and feeling that really eerie feeling that you get with the hairs of the back of your neck stand up. Or pick a situation where you were angered by somebody or something and it really irritated you, and in that instantaneous moment you felt the blood rush right up to your head, for example. Or it could be an anxious situation where you felt really nervous and not knowing what to expect, So these are just very, very vague examples, but I want you to use your imagination to maybe bring yourself back to that situation. And then we're going to observe what your body's responses are going to be like as I walk you through some of the physiological changes, as I've mentioned, that will occur in your body. And then we're going to observe them so that we can really experience it and be in the moment with what we are trying to convey today. So are you ready? Okay. So close your eyes and imagine, whichever scenario that is, picture your breathing. Now, do you notice that maybe your breathing has gotten a little bit shorter? Maybe it's increased and your heart rate may have actually also started to get a little bit more pumping than usual. Notice there's some muscle tension. And I don't know about you, but generally my hands and feet tend to get a little bit cold. So the body temperature actually will lower. And also, if you take very close notice of your body, the heart rate will increase as the blood flow will start to move from your heart all the way to your hands and feet. So there's a slight little bit of tingling sensation in your hands and feet. Now, all these signs that I've described to you, how does this chain of reaction occur? Now, for example, during a scare, our body sends a signal to the brain, which then lands at the part of the brain called the amygdala. Now, remember the almond-shaped bundle of neurons that we talked about in an earlier episode? We'll circle back to the beginning of this series for a quick review if you have forgotten, or you just need a little refresher. Now, what the amygdala does is it then signals to the hypothalamus, which is another part of the middle part of your brain, and the hypothalamus is an area where you have the activation of the next gland, which is called the pituitary gland. Now, the pituitary gland is actually a very special gland because this is the area where your nervous system and your hormonal system actually meet. And so they work together at the pituitary gland, which then, of course, you get a signaling of further secretion of other hormones and neurotransmitters. But in this case, we're going to talk about it from the nervous system and the hormonal system just in two different pathways so that I could actually take you down each of the paths so that we can then merge together at the end response. Now, once the activation of the pituitary gland happens, there is secretion of the adrenocorticotropic hormones. And this is a group of hormones that actually are triggers for your adrenal glands to actually produce cortisol. Now, cortisol, everybody knows, right? Cortisol is the stress hormone, as everybody knows it. But what are adrenal glands? Have you ever looked at a picture of the kidney? And if you haven't, please go and Google it, because this is actually, I think, something that it's I think of interest to everybody to at least know what our organs look like. And so if you do a Google picture search, you'll see that there's a little triangular, almost like marshmallowy structure that sits right on top of the kidney lobes. And that is what the adrenal glands look like. Now, on the outside edges, which is what we typically call the adrenal cortex, there's a different hormone that's going to be secreted. But right now we're talking about cortisol, which is secreted by the inside triangle, which is what we call the medulla. So the adrenal medulla is the area where we have the cortisol secretion. Now what happens is cortisol is then released and it's circulated into the rest of your body through the bloodstream. Now, one of its main functions that cortisol does after it's being released is it turns fat into energy so that you get ready for your muscles to be able to use that energy. And in the cases of stress responses where, you are in fear of your survival, that's when your muscles come in really handy, because then you might want to escape or you might have to fight, right? So in preparation for either a fight or a flight. So cortisol, along with a couple of other hormones, what it does is it actually increases heart rate as well, right? Because you're going to need a little bit of extra blood flow to be pumping through your body in order for you to fight or flight. And as a result, you're also going to have an increase in your breathing pattern and the number of breaths that you take. They're going to become shallower and more in numbers, so that, again, you can be prepared for fight or flight. So in other words, blood pressure regulation is also something that cortisol will tend to do. Now, in our future episodes, we may actually circle back and talk about cortisol some more. Now, the body is truly amazing, because you have to picture that at the same time that this whole chain that's happening with the cortisol release is happening, we also have the nervous system that then gives your adrenal gland a little nudge, especially at the cortex level as well. And what it does is it kind of nudges the adrenal gland to squirt maybe a dose of adrenaline. Now, what is adrenaline? Adrenaline is a hormone or a neurotransmitter, whichever way you want to sort of approach it, because it really depends on, the downstream effects. That's how we categorize whether it's this or that. But so a couple of examples that we may be familiar with is epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? So again, one of the effects of epinephrine and norepinephrine is to be able to prepare your muscles for action. Now, how does it do that? Well, epinephrine and norepinephrine actually have a direct correlation to muscle tension. So they actually affect our muscle tension, as well as it does have another role in dilation of pupils. Now, when you are scared, in fear, or you are angry, or you are anxious, I'm pretty sure you would have noticed that in whether cartoons or movies or any particular real life character, their pupils will dilate. And it's because this allows for better vision, right? So that you can actually expand your visual field so that you may perceive dangers at a better, more comprehensive perspective. So that is one of the big things that epinephrine and norepinephrine does, especially when your body is under a stressful situation. Now, another aspect of what happens in the body is your immune system function. Now, this is a very complex system. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally just going to graze over it and just give you a very, very brief sort of correlation between actually all three of these hormones and their effects. So basically what it does is cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. This generally will increase your immune system's function. Now, the details of that, maybe we'll explore at a different episode because it is a very complex system. I mean, I know through my schooling, we spent many years, not months, years, talking about immunology, which is the study of the immune system. So there is no way I could actually describe it to you in the few minutes that we have to talk about this topic. But it is of very significant importance, especially when, we are in times of high stress, but also in times when, like our population, we are getting sick in all fronts. We're talking mental stress, physical stress, and literally internal stress, right? So there are a lot of implications where our immune system plays a very critical role. So here's the really cool part about all of this science. All of these signaling molecules are produced by the adrenal gland. And all roads lead back to your kidneys, which is kind of interesting because when I was learning sort of the physiology of all the different organ systems in our bodies from a more Western physiology standpoint, kidneys didn't really play too huge of a role, I'd say, in terms of emotions. So again, none of the organ systems play any particular roles other than the heart. None of them really played any roles in emotions in Western sort of thinking. But it's interesting that in the traditional Chinese medicine perspective, each organ has its own emotions that it's associated with. And of course, there is one for the kidneys, which is fear. Now, it's not just fear, but fear is one of the most general ones that they associated with because the other one is willpower. But in this episode, we really won't be focusing on the willpower aspect of things because I think that's a little bit of a different pathway to sort of discuss. So what we'll do is we're kind of making it, again, we're simplifying things so that we can make it more easily understandable, especially from the beginning terms, so that it doesn't get too complex. Otherwise, we'd never be able to draw a line, right? Because with biology and all things in nature, everything's interconnected. So it's really hard to actually have a cut, dry separation. But in traditional Chinese medicine, the kidneys are associated with fear in today's episode. And so let's explore a little bit from the Eastern medicine side. The functions of the kidney are a little different on this side of the fence. They are a key organ for sustaining life, as it's been passed on for thousands of years in knowledge, that the kidneys hold the essence of life. And they usually separate this in pre-birth essence as well as post-birth essence. Now, pre-birth essence is something that you are born with. And I usually use the analogy of a savings account. Now, this is a savings account that you cannot forever tap into. So maybe think of it as a GIC that's locked in for your lifetime. So you can't unlock it in 3 or 5 years' time. Well, I guess you technically could because, you could take out the interest and not the principal amount. But at the very, basis of it, if you use it up, you use it up. That nest egg is all you have. And because you are born with it and you cannot replenish it in that pre-birth essence, that is what makes it so extra special. And this is what comes from in the kidneys. Now, they also do have a postnatal essence that we won't be talking about today, but the postnatal essence, yes, it's replenishable, but you have to understand that in traditional Chinese medicine, they did have a very detailed explanation as to which is which and why one is replenishable and what one isn't. So maybe again in a future episode, I'll see if I can work it in so that it makes a little more sense. But in this episode, what we'll focus on is the kidneys, which hold the prenatal essence. So that is one of its crucial roles. To sustain life, you require essence. Now, the second function that is also very important is the responsibility for growth. Now, the kidneys are actually, because they hold the essence of life, they are very much associated with reproduction, growth, as well as development or maturation. So during puberty, our kidneys actually play a very big role in the bodily changes that happen. Now you'll see as we break down more of the functions that are associated with the kidney, you'll see why that is the case. Okay, so working with the lungs, the kidneys also have a very big role in water metabolism as well as respiration. Now, in Western medicine, we definitely associate it with water metabolism because kidneys filtrate urine, and it is one of the main organs that we use to excrete fluids from our bodies. But in Chinese medicine, kidneys also work very closely with the lungs for breathing, respiration, which is another concept that's very interesting that I've recently been kind of toying around with because I was like, wow, breathing has such a big impact on practically every single system in our bodies, and its function is almost inseparable from every single thing that we do in life. So, if the kidneys also then have a role in breathing, then it's got to be pretty dang important, right? So that's definitely material for another episode as well. I mean, as you can see, like I could go on and on, like for days on this topic. Now, last but not least, the kidneys in traditional Chinese medicine are also connected with the bones, your teeth, as well as your ears and hair. I know, right? Your head of hair. Like my head of hair. Okay, I have premature whitening or graying of my hair, partly genetic because my mom had it and my grandma had it. So I know in my X gene that I got from my mom as well as my grandma, that is what carries the gene for premature graying of hair. But I also know from my birth history that my mom was also very malnourished. And if she was malnourished, then my prenatal essence will definitely be also on the weaker side, meaning that I was probably a little bit less endowed with a good boost of prenatal essence. And since we know after today, you guys are going to become a little bit more familiar with these subtle details, is that prenatal essence has to do with kidneys. And therefore, I was born with weaker kidneys as well because I was lacking in certain departments. So these are things that I've recently, in the past year and a half, learned a lot about my own body and the things that are manifested in my physical, mental, emotional, and just biological, just every part of it. I've been piecing it together and it's just fascinating. I just cannot stop thinking about all the little intricacies. So I thought I'd share that with you guys. So, not surprising to see that if there's an imbalance in the kidneys, that's a result of the fear and anxiety that is in excessive amounts, that will also have a depletion of our adrenal glands as well as our immune functions, which undoubtedly will have consequences on the kidney's functions. And therefore, a lot of times, people will experience frequent urination or incontinence situations. You might experience some night sweats, some dry mouth issues, perhaps some poor short-term memory will start to appear. Low back issues are very common. And the kidney is actually connected to the ear in a lot of times. So ringing or tinnitus in the ears or hearing loss could also be one of the symptoms that could appear, as well as something I've mentioned just earlier, premature graying of hair as well as hair loss. Now, cause and effect is really not linear in a sense, but actually very circular. And emotions are not the only, I'd say, factor contributing to diseases, right? We must also consider lifestyle. Lifestyle is one of those things that we quite often don't directly put into this equation because we're always kind of living in the moment. And because we live in such a fast-paced world, we are full of stressors that we put on our bodies as well as on our minds. And one of the things that I often find quite surprising, but at the same time, it kind of is something that we see on a day-to-day basis, is that people are always rushing. They seem to always be rushing to get from point A to point B, and there never seems to be enough time to do everything or to feel everything or to even like squeeze in a little me time. I mean, I understand we can't help but get sick or feel a little bit under the weather sometimes, but to be honest, there's no quick solution, right, to a bad relationship, a stressful job, or financial challenges. So the only way to help ourselves is really to try to remove the primary stressors first. Because only then can we consider dealing with the emotions and the lifestyle issues. And that's when you can actually address, how to reach a harmonious balance and maintain it, right? Maintaining it for reaching better health and well-being of basically your day-to-day. So I'm going to conclude with this one quote or statement that Ekman made in his 1999 paper that he wrote in The Evolution of Psychology. Emotions evolved for their adaptive values in dealing with fundamental life tasks. In essence, emotions help us navigate through our busy lives, so let's put them to good use. Whatever brings you happiness and makes you feel good, do more of it. Especially if there's a positive aspect that you can pass on to another person. All right, Healthy Wisdomers, it's been a pleasure to share this knowledge with you today. Please take a minute to subscribe, follow, and rate this episode. And invite your friends to join us on this journey. Remember, knowledge alone will not give you success, but it's what you do with that knowledge that brings about results. This is the Healthy Wisdom Series with Dr. Jen Chen. I'll catch you guys on the next.